The pendant that froze the millionaire. The morning sun spilled through the tall glass windows of the Parker Tower, making the lobby shine like gold. Kate adjusted the strap of her worn leather bag, balancing a folder of reports in one hand and holding onto her daughter's small fingers with the other. "Mom, can I put my drawing in the window today?" Sophie asked, her little voice full of excitement. Without waiting for an answer, she dashed ahead, her shoes tapping quickly across the polished marble floor. "Sophie, stay close to me," Kate called, her heart racing. She hurried after her daughter, her heels clicking, but Sophie was already charming the security guards and chatting with the receptionists as if she belonged in this world of glass and steel. Everyone in the lobby smiled at the girl. She had a way of making people soften, even in a place ruled by serious men in suits. Kate sighed. She never liked bringing Sophie to work, but today there had been no other choice. The babysitter canceled last minute and Kate couldn't risk being late. She needed this job. It wasn't just about paying the rent. It was about proving that even as a single mother, she could stand tall. Just then, the sound of expensive shoes echoed across the floor. Heads turned. Daniel Parker, the CEO himself, strode quickly through the lobby, his dark suit sharp, his phone pressed against his ear. Everyone knew better than to disturb him when he was moving like this. He was a man with no time to waste and no patience for mistakes. But fate had other plans. Daniel bent down to pick up the pen he had dropped. As he straightened, his eyes landed on a small figure standing in front of him. Sophie. "Hi," she said cheerfully, her smile bright enough to stop anyone in their tracks. Daniel's lips curved into a polite smile. He was about to continue on his way when something caught his eye. The pendant, it swung gently from Sophie's neck as she moved, a simple silver circle with a small engraving, a design so unique, so unforgettable that his heart skipped a beat. For a moment, Daniel froze, his breath caught in his throat. His hand gripped the pen tighter as the world around him blurred. That pendant. He knew it. A memory slammed into him like a wave. A warm summer years ago, the sound of waves crashing against the shore. A young woman with sparkling eyes laughing under the fading sunset, his hand trembling as he placed that very pendant around her neck. A promise whispered. A goodbye that wasn't supposed to be final. And then, silence. They had never seen each other again. Until now. Daniel blinked, his sharp businesslike mask slipping for just a second. He stared at the child, at her bright eyes and the silver pendant that should have been lost to the past. "Where did you get that necklace?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. Kate, rushing up behind Sophie, immediately sensed something wrong. She placed a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Is something the matter, Mr. Parker?" Daniel looked up at Kate, his eyes narrowing. His CEO instincts told him to regain control, to keep moving, to not let emotion show. But another part of him, a part buried under years of money, power, and routine, whispered a truth he didn't want to believe. Because the woman standing before him looked familiar. Her eyes, her face, it was impossible. Kate held her head high, though her stomach tightened under his intense gaze. She couldn't afford trouble, not here, not today. "I just noticed the pendant," Daniel finally said, forcing his voice back to calm. "It looks familiar." Kate glanced down at Sophie's necklace and brushed it with her fingers. It was a gift, a very old one. Daniel's jaw tightened. He wanted to ask more, but his phone buzzed, calling him back to the present. The world of board meetings, investors, and deadlines waited for no one, not even him. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the image of that pendant, or the unsettling thought that the little girl who had just smiled at him might be connected to a past he thought was gone forever. Kate, meanwhile, gently pulled Sophie close. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to breathe. She had worked too hard to keep her life steady, to keep secrets buried where they belonged. If Daniel Parker really remembered, everything could change. And somewhere deep inside, both of them knew the story had only just begun. The CEO's doubt. Daniel Parker sat in his corner office, the skyline of the city spread out before him like a painting of glass and steel. Normally, this view gave him clarity. It was his empire, his achievement, proof of years of relentless ambition. Yet today, the shining skyscrapers felt distant, hollow, and unable to silence the storm in his mind. His hand rested on a folder of financial reports, but he hadn't read a single line. All he could see was the little girl's smile and the pendant that swung against her chest like a haunting ghost from the past. That pendant had not been some meaningless trinket. It was personal, intimate. He remembered saving for weeks to buy it as a young man. He remembered the trembling in his fingers as he clasped it around a young woman's neck during their final summer together. He had told himself she would never forget him, that even if life pulled them apart, the pendant would carry his memory. But time had proven otherwise, or so he thought, until today. Daniel leaned back in his leather chair, loosening his tie. His logical, business-trained mind tried to dismiss what he had seen as coincidence. The world was full of silver jewelry, after all. Designs repeated, imitations flooded the market. But no, this was different. The engraving, small and precise, had been his idea, a single word etched in a language few people recognized. There was no mistaking it. The girl, Sophie. Could she be connected to that lost chapter of his life? And if so, how? His chest tightened at the thought, but he forced himself to breathe. He had faced hostile board members, billion-dollar lawsuits, and international negotiations, yet none of those had unsettled him the way one child with a pendant had. Across town, Kate tucked Sophie into bed in their small apartment. The child's laughter had carried her through the day, but once the lights dimmed, worry crept in. She couldn't forget the way Daniel Parker had looked at Sophie, as if he had seen a ghost. Kate knew that look. It was the look of recognition, and recognition was dangerous. She sat quietly at the edge of the bed, brushing Sophie's hair back from her forehead. The pendant glimmered faintly in the half-light. Kate's throat tightened. That pendant had been her secret for years, the only piece left from a time she had locked away in memory. She had told Sophie it was just jewelry, nothing more. But the truth ran deeper. The truth had weight. And if Daniel Parker remembered, if he dared to ask questions, everything Kate had worked to protect might unravel. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the office earlier than usual. His mind wasn't on the upcoming investor call or the negotiations with a rival firm. Instead, he found himself typing Kate's name into the company's employment records. Kate Johnson, assistant manager in the café division, hired 3 years ago. Dependable, punctual, hardworking. No notes of misconduct, no scandals, just an ordinary employee, on the surface. But Daniel didn't believe in coincidences, not in business and not in life. He closed the file and drummed his fingers against the desk. He needed more information, but he couldn't simply summon her into his office without raising suspicion. The company gossip mill spun fast, and he couldn't risk questions he wasn't ready to answer. For now, he would watch quietly. That afternoon, Daniel passed through the lobby again. His gaze swept across the cafe where Kate was arranging pastries behind the counter while Sophie sat quietly at a table coloring in a notebook. She looked so much like... No, he couldn't think that yet. He couldn't allow himself to finish the thought. But still, his eyes lingered, his chest tightening with a mixture of dread and something dangerously close to hope. Kate noticed him. Their eyes met for only a second, but it was enough. She could read the question in his gaze even though he said nothing. He was wondering. He was suspecting. And Kate knew she had to be careful. She had built her life carefully, layer by layer, wall by wall, to keep the past locked away. Daniel Parker had no right to tear it open now. Still, the truth had a way of surfacing when you least expected it. And both of them, in their own guarded hearts, felt the pull of something bigger than coincidence. The pendant had been the spark, but the fire was only beginning to spread. The questions that shouldn't be asked. The following days at Parker Tower carried on with their usual rhythm. Executives rushing to meetings, assistants balancing trays of coffee, and the low hum of conversation filling the marble lobby. Yet beneath the polished surface, something unspoken stirred. Daniel Parker was a man known for his ability to focus, to shut out distractions until goals were met. But ever since the encounter with Sophie and that pendant, his mind had betrayed him. No matter how hard he tried to bury himself in contracts and board discussions, his thoughts kept circling back to the child with bright eyes and a smile that refused to leave his memory. He had always prided himself on his discipline. Discipline had built his empire, had turned him into the man people respected and feared. Yet when he looked down from his office window and caught glimpses of Kate working diligently behind the café counter, when he saw Sophie scribbling away in her little notebook, the walls of control began to crack, and the cracks were widening. Daniel found himself walking to the café more often than necessary, always with the excuse of a quick coffee or a brief word with the manager. Each time his gaze would linger just a little too long on Sophie. He noticed the way she greeted everyone, her warmth disarming even the coldest employees. He saw the drawings she proudly taped to the side of the counter, sketches of houses, trees, and sometimes the outline of a tall man in a suit that made his breath catch. He wondered how much of himself he could see in her, but quickly forced the thought away. On one particular afternoon, fate pushed him closer to the answers he both longed for and dreaded. Sophie had been coloring quietly while Kate worked when Daniel approached the counter. His voice was calm, almost casual, but his eyes betrayed the weight behind his words. "That's a beautiful necklace you have," he said softly, directing his attention toward Sophie. "Who gave it to you?" Sophie looked up at him with innocent eyes, twirling the pendant between her fingers as if it were the most natural question in the world. "Mommy said it's special," she replied brightly. "She said someone important gave it to her a long time ago." The words struck Daniel harder than he expected. A long time ago. He swallowed the rush of emotions rising in his throat, careful not to reveal his reaction. "I see," he managed, offering her a faint smile before turning his gaze toward Kate. Kate's entire body stiffened. Her hands, usually so steady as she worked, trembled slightly as she arranged cups on the counter. She had heard the exchange and recognized the danger immediately. Daniel Parker wasn't merely curious, he was digging. And every question Ked brought him closer to the truth she had fought for years to protect. Later that evening, Kate sat at her kitchen table, staring at the pendant lying in her palm. Sophie was asleep, curled under her blanket, unaware of the storm that brewed around her existence. Kate's thoughts spiraled into the past, to a summer when her heart had belonged to a man who promised the world, but disappeared before dawn broke. She had never intended to cross paths with him again, never imagined their lives would collide under the fluorescent lights of Parker Tower. Yet destiny had a cruel sense of humor, and here they were, bound together once more by a secret neither could fully escape. Daniel, in his office that same night, could not shake Sophie's words. Someone important gave it to her a long time ago. The echo of that sentence haunted him. Could it truly be possible? Was fate cruel enough to hide such a truth from him all these years? He poured himself a drink, the city glowing beneath his window, and for the first time in a long while, he felt powerless. Numbers and strategies could not untangle this mystery. Only courage could, and courage was not something he had exercised in matters of the heart. The stage was quietly being set for a confrontation that neither of them wanted but both knew was coming. Sophie's innocence had already cracked the careful walls Kate built, and Daniel's relentless nature would not allow him to let go. The pendant had reawakened something long buried, and now, step by step, question by question, the truth was creeping to the surface, unstoppable as the tide. The confrontation in the shadows. The next few days at Parker Tower passed in a strange blur. Outwardly, everything appeared the same. Executives shuffled between glass-walled conference rooms, assistants carried documents as though their lives depended on it, and the cafe bustled with the soft chatter of employees grabbing their daily coffee. Yet beneath that rhythm lay a pulse of unspoken tension. Daniel Parker could not focus. He was a man who thrived on control, on strategies and outcomes, yet now he felt cornered by an uncertainty he could neither calculate nor ignore. The pendant, Sophie's words, Kate's guarded eyes, they circled in his mind like vultures. Finally, he decided the matter could not be left to chance. Daniel was not the type of man to sit back and let mysteries linger. If there was truth hidden in Kate Johnson's silence, he would find it. And so, one evening after most employees had gone home, he waited in the shadows of the lobby, his tall figure blending into the dimmed light. He knew Kate often stayed late finishing the cafe's paperwork, carefully wiping counters long after the last customer left. And tonight, she was there just as he expected, her movements methodical, her shoulders heavy with exhaustion. When she finally turned to leave, Daniel stepped forward. The sound of his voice, low and commanding, filled the quiet lobby. "We need to talk, Kate." She froze, her keys clutched tightly in her hand, and for a moment her expression betrayed something she had worked hard to hide: fear. Slowly she turned to face him, her posture straightening in that way people do when they are preparing for battle. "Mr. Parker," she said evenly, though her voice carried the faintest tremor. "It's late. Shouldn't you be heading home?" Daniel moved closer, his eyes locked onto hers, unblinking. "Home can wait. This can't." He paused, searching her face as if it could provide the answers her lips refused to give. "That pendant your daughter wears, it's not just jewelry. I recognize it. I know exactly where it came from, and I need to know why Sophie has it." The pursuit of truth, the confrontation in the lobby had left both Daniel and Kate shaken in ways they struggled to hide. For Daniel, it was as if a door to the past had been forced open, flooding him with memories he had buried beneath years of ambition and responsibility. He had walked away that night with her words echoing in his head, "It changes nothing." Yet to him, it changed everything. A man could replace money, rebuild a business, repair a reputation, but years with a child, years of first steps, first words, laughter, and moments he had never been part of, those were gone forever. That truth dug into him like a thorn, and he knew he could not turn away now. He needed answers, and more than answers, he needed to know Sophie. For Kate, the weight of the confrontation pressed on her like a storm cloud. She had kept her life orderly for so long, building walls to protect Sophie from questions that had no easy answers. Now those walls had been cracked, and Daniel Parker, powerful, relentless, and stubborn, was pressing at the edges. She feared his influence, not because she doubted his ability to care for Sophie, but because she feared losing control of the life she had built. She had carried the burdens of motherhood alone. She had shaped her daughter's world with her own two hands. The thought of Daniel stepping into that world and rewriting it terrified her more than anything. Over the next week, Daniel made no attempt to hide his growing interest. He found reasons to stop by the cafe each morning, lingering longer than necessary, asking Sophie small, casual questions. He noticed her favorite colors from the drawings she taped on the counter, the way she liked to hum softly when she was focused, the spark in her eyes when she explained her pictures. To an outsider, it might have seemed like the casual fondness of a CEO indulging a child, but for Daniel it was something far more profound. Every small detail about Sophie felt like a piece of a puzzle he was desperate to complete. Kate watched it all with unease. She could feel Sophie being drawn toward him, not with the fear or suspicion adults carried, but with the pure openness only a child possessed. Sophie didn't understand the storm brewing around her. She only knew that Mr. Parker asked about her drawings, that he listened when she spoke, and that he smiled in a way that made her proud of the pendant she wore every day. Kate's heart clenched each time she saw it. The bond was growing faster than she could stop it. One evening, as Kate finished closing duties at the cafe, Daniel appeared again. The lobby was mostly empty, the silence broken only by the distant hum of the city beyond the glass doors. He approached her not as a CEO commanding authority, but as a man carrying the weight of unanswered questions. His voice was steady, but there was an edge of quiet desperation beneath it. "Kate, I can't ignore this anymore. I see her every day. I see myself in her, and I know you feel it too. Why are you keeping the truth from me?" Kate set down the tray she had been holding, her knuckles white against the polished surface. She took a deep breath, summoning the resolve she had relied on for years. "Because the truth has consequences, Daniel. You live in a world of power and control where everything bends to your will. But this is different. Sophie isn't a business deal you can negotiate or a company you can acquire. She's a child, my child. I've raised her with stability, with love, without the shadows of your empire touching her life. You think you're ready to step into her world, but are you ready for the damage that comes with it? Her words struck him deeply, but Daniel didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice firm. You don't understand, Kate. I've spent my entire life chasing success, and yet nothing I've built matters when I think about what I may have lost. If Sophie is my daughter, then I've already missed too much. But I will not miss the rest. You can hate me, you can shut me out, but you can't deny me the truth forever. The intensity in his eyes unsettled her. She had expected him to back away, to decide that his empire mattered more than an unplanned truth from years ago. But this wasn't the cold, distant CEO she had imagined him to be. This was a man whose heart was suddenly laid bare, whose determination came not from greed, but from something far more dangerous: love. Kate turned away, her chest tight, her vision blurring with unshed tears. If you're so determined, Daniel, then understand this. Once you step into her life, there's no going back. She will see you, not as a CEO, not as some figure of power, but as someone she will trust. And if you fail her, if you hurt her, even once, I won't forgive you, ever. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he nodded, his voice steady as he answered. Then I won't fail her. The silence between them stretched, heavy with the weight of truths that had finally been spoken aloud. And though Kate's fear lingered and Daniel's determination burned brighter than ever, both of them understood one undeniable reality. The course of their lives had already shifted. Fate, once buried, had risen again, and there was no turning back. A father's proof. The days that followed their tense exchange became a quiet battlefield between resolve and emotion. Daniel had made his intentions clear. He would not step away, not now that he believed Sophie was his daughter. Kate, however, carried her own fierce determination. She had spent years protecting her child from disappointment, years shielding her from the instability that could come from someone entering and leaving her life too easily. Yet for the first time, she felt her carefully laid defenses bending. Daniel was not retreating, and worse, he was not acting as the ruthless CEO she had prepared herself to resist. Instead, he was showing a side of himself she had never expected, the side she remembered from long ago. It began subtly. One morning, Sophie bounded into the café with her notebook of drawings, and Daniel, who was on his way to a meeting, stopped when she proudly waved him over. He was already late, and his assistants lingered nearby, restless with impatience, but Daniel knelt down at her table anyway. He asked her about each picture, listened attentively, and even asked for one to keep. Sophie, delighted, tore a page from her notebook, a sketch of a lighthouse with beams of light stretching across the sea, and handed it to him as though it were the most precious treasure in the world. Daniel carried it into his meeting, sliding it into the leather folder that usually contained contracts worth millions. He did not notice the raised eyebrows of his board members when he glanced at the drawing between discussions. For the first time in years, something more important than profit occupied his mind. Kate watched these small moments with a mixture of unease and reluctant admiration. She could not deny Sophie's joy. Her daughter had never had a father figure, never experienced the simple pride of someone looking at her with that mix of wonder and pride. The more time Daniel spent with Sophie, the more natural the bond between them became. And Kate, standing on the sidelines, found her own resolve shaking with every laugh, every glance, every moment where she saw her daughter's world brighten because of him. One evening, a storm rolled across the city, heavy rain pelting the windows of Parker Tower as thunder echoed in the distance. The cafe had closed early, and Kate was struggling to gather her paperwork while keeping Sophie entertained. The power flickered once, then twice, and finally went out completely, leaving the lobby dim except for the emergency lights. Sophie, who had always been uneasy during storms, clutched her mother's arm tightly, her pendant glinting faintly in the shadows. Daniel appeared moments later, his presence steady and calm against the storm's chaos. Without hesitation, he knelt beside Sophie, his voice gentle, his tone stripped of authority and softened into something deeply human. "Do you know what storms are, Sophie? They're just the sky playing drums. Loud but harmless. Want to hear a secret? When I was a boy, I used to count between the lightning and the thunder like a game. The longer the gap, the farther away the storm is. Want to try it with me? Sophie blinked up at him, her fear fading into curiosity. Together they counted, 1, 2, 3, before thunder rumbled in the distance. Sophie giggled nervously, then counted again, this time louder, braver. Within minutes, her laughter echoed in the lobby, chasing away the fear that had clung to her only moments before. Kate stood silently, her chest tightening as she watched. This was not the Daniel Parker the world knew. This was not the calculating CEO whose decisions shaped empires. This was the Daniel she had once known, the young man who had made promises under a summer sky, the man who had been capable of gentleness and sincerity before the world hardened him. And now that part of him was resurfacing, not for her, but for Sophie. When the storm passed and the lights flickered back on, Sophie was curled against Daniel's shoulder, her breathing soft with the beginnings of sleep. Daniel carried her carefully, almost reverently, before handing her back to Kate. His eyes met hers, and though no words were spoken, the truth was undeniable. He wasn't playing a role, he wasn't chasing a whim, he was showing her, moment by moment, that he wanted to be there. For Sophie, and perhaps for Kate as well. That night, after Sophie was tucked safely into bed, Kate sat alone by the window of their small apartment, staring at the pendant that still rested against her daughter's chest. The storm outside had passed, but a storm of another kind raged within her. She had sworn to protect Sophie, to never let the past intrude on the life she had built. Yet Daniel's presence was no longer something she could dismiss. He was proving himself not with money, not with power, but with the quiet, steady acts of a man trying to make up for lost time. And Kate, for the first time, began to wonder if keeping him away was still the right choice, or if fate had always intended for this moment to come. The truth that couldn't stay buried. The following week unfolded with a strange mixture of calm and tension, as though life itself was holding its breath. On the surface, everything appeared ordinary. Kate went to work each day, Sophie skipped happily beside her, and Daniel moved through the building with the usual gravity of a man whose signature determined the fate of companies. Yet beneath that normal rhythm, all three of them knew something had shifted. Sophie sensed it in ways only a child could. She did not understand the details, but she felt the weight in her mother's voice, the glances exchanged between Kate and Daniel, the way conversations seemed to carry unspoken words that floated heavy in the air. Daniel, for his part, had reached the edge of patience. He was not a man accustomed to waiting. He had clawed his way up from nothing into one of the most powerful corporate positions in the city by making decisions quickly and refusing to leave questions unanswered. But with Kate, with Sophie, the rules were different. He had approached cautiously, shown restraint, offered proof of sincerity in the only way he knew, through his actions. Yet restraint could only last so long. There came a moment when truth, no matter how deeply buried, demanded to be spoken. That moment arrived on a Friday evening, just as the last light of day bled across the glass towers of the Basam skyline. Kate had finished her shift and was gathering her things when Daniel approached her in the quiet of the café. He was not in a rush, not surrounded by assistants or phone calls, but alone, his expression serious yet strangely vulnerable. She stiffened immediately, instinctively bracing for another confrontation. But his tone was softer than she expected, steady, but carrying a depth that reached past the hardened CEO mask he usually wore. "Kate," he began, "we can't keep circling around this. I need the truth. I deserve it, and more importantly, Sophie deserves it." Her hands froze over the stack of papers she was collecting. For a long moment she did not speak, her chest rising and falling as though she were struggling with invisible weights. Finally she looked up, her eyes flashing with a mixture of fear, pain, and defiance. "And what happens when the truth is spoken, Daniel? Do you plan to take her away? Do you plan to claim her like you claim everything else in your world? Because you can? Do you even realize what you're asking? If I confirm what you already suspect, her life will never be the same. She'll no longer just be my Sophie. She'll become yours too, and you have no idea the risks that come with that." Daniel did not flinch. He had expected her anger, her walls, her defense, but he stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. I am not here to take her away, Kate. I am here because I cannot live another day not knowing her. I am here because the thought of missing even one more moment of her life is unbearable. You can hate me for the past. You can question whether I deserve a place, but don't you dare think I don't care. If she is my daughter, then I love her already more than I have words for, and I won't disappear again. Kate's resolve trembled, though she tried to steady it. Her throat tightened as she fought back the rush of emotions. And she remembered the young man she had once loved, remembered how he had left without warning, remembered the years of silence that followed. Yet she also saw the man before her now, changed, weathered by success and burden, but still carrying the same fire in his eyes. And perhaps for the first time, she saw that his words were not empty. Before she could answer, a small voice interrupted them. Sophie had woken from her nap in the back room and had wandered out, her eyes wide as she saw her mother standing so close to Mr. Parker. She clutched the silver pendant with her tiny hand, tilting her head curiously. Mommy, why does he look at me like that? The question sliced through the air, simple and innocent, yet powerful enough to shatter the last barrier Kate had held. Her lips parted, and for once she could not hide behind excuses or deflections. She dropped her gaze to her daughter, then back to Daniel, and in that silence the truth spoke for itself. Her voice broke as she finally said the words she had carried for years. Because, Sophie, he's your father. The room seemed to still. Daniel inhaled sharply, his chest tightening as the world tilted beneath him. Sophie's eyes widened, confusion clouding her features before curiosity replaced it. My father? She whispered, as if tasting the word for the first time. Kate knelt, taking her daughter's hand gently. Yes, sweetheart. I didn't tell you before because I wanted to protect you, but he's here now, and he wants to know you. Sophie turned slowly to Daniel, her innocence unscarred by the weight of history. She studied him for a long moment, then stepped forward and asked the question that would undo him completely. Were you the one who gave Mommy this necklace? Daniel's throat closed, but he managed to nod, his eyes shimmering with the kind of emotion no boardroom had ever seen. Yes, he said softly, long time ago, and I never stopped wishing I hadn't let you both go. In that moment, Sophie smiled faintly, as though the storm around her had settled into something she could understand. She reached out, her small hand brushing his. The simple contact broke whatever defenses Daniel still carried, and he knelt to meet her eyes, his powerful frame humbled in front of a child who had unknowingly held his heart all along. Kate, watching, felt both fear and relief wash over her. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be complications, legalities, questions from the world outside their little circle. But as she saw Sophie's small fingers curl around Daniel's, she also knew some truths were too powerful to hide forever. The past had caught up to them, but perhaps, just perhaps, the future could hold something new. The pendant had begun the story, a symbol of a summer that was never supposed to last. Now it had become something more. A bridge between the life Kate had built alone and the life that Daniel longed to share. And as the three of them stood together in the quiet café, the unspoken promise was clear. Whatever battles lay ahead, they would face them not as strangers bound by secrets, but as a family brought together by truth.